So the topic I've chosen for today's conference is the prospect of attributing legal personhood to social or care robots. And I want to show you where we can find this advocacy for attributing legal personhood to some kinds of robots, to identify the arguments that underlie this proposal and discuss them with you. In this post-note of the UK Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, that is specifically devoted to robotics in social care, we can see that the legal personality for robots is considered one of the most pressing issues we have to deal with. But perhaps the most renowned document that contains this proposal is the resolution of the European Parliament that was adopted by the General Assembly in February 2017. It is a resolution addressed to of the European Parliament, addressed to the European Commission, that asks the Commission to explore the possibility of regulating robotics and artificial intelligence, to introduce civil rules for robotics. And at paragraph 59, under the umbrella of liability, the resolution states that the Commission should explore the implications of all possible solutions for the problem of liability, and then there is a list from A to F, and the very last solution that is envisioned is that of creating a specific legal status for robots in the long run, so that at least the most sophisticated autonomous robots could be established as having the status of electronic persons responsible for making good any damage they may cause, and possibly applying electronic personality to cases where robots make autonomous decisions or otherwise interact with third parties independently. Now, already in this statement, we can find two possible perspectives from which we can look at this idea. One is an ontological perspective. Robots deserve rights, or at least at the minimum have to be protected by the law in ways that are different from the way we protect things, from the way we protect property. And then there is another perspective, sort of a functionalist approach, under which legal personhood is just a technical solution to solve a very practical problem, that of attributing liability for damages that have been caused by the actions of robotic devices. We have to rule out, certainly, the more radical version of this claim, that is, robots deserve to be treated as humans, deserve legal personhood because they are so human-like, they are intelligent, self-conscious, they have moral agency, because simply this argument is not timely. The state-of-the-art technology cannot support such claim. Now I have identified four perspectives, four proposals that can be traced back to an ontological perspective. Perhaps they are not they have no so clear-cut boundaries, but I describe them as such for making my reasoning more clearer. First of all, with special regard to robots used in healthcare, that is, robots used in hospitals, in care homes, in private houses to assist the elderly, or to help with children with some kind of intellectual disabilities, we can see that we can make an argument for which they really become artificial medical agents. They interact socially with people, they form emotional bonds with them, they elicit emotion, feelings in the people with whom they interact. To some extent, they even replace healthcare professionals. They replace the nurse, they replace the surgeon, they can replace, or at least there is an ambition that they can replace a physician. So in this case, legal personhood would just mirror this reality, would just formalize this relationship that is in place, would serve this purpose of giving a legal structure to this relationship that is in place between the human agent and the artificial agent. But if we look at the ethical concept of care, of good care, of which I'm not an expert, but I refer specifically to the work of Mark Kokelberg, or if we look at the legal concept of care, we see that it requires a good amount of human contact. It has psychological, emotional dimensions and not purely material ones. The legal concept of care we can derive, for instance, from the requirements for guardianship. We can derive from the rules on the duties that parents owe to their children. We can also refer to the law of adoption to some extent. So, and we can see that robots with machines cannot meet the standards of good care in ethical and legal sense. Therefore, using the legal structure of legal personhood for describing this relationship could perhaps lead us to rationalize this replacement, to normalize the delegation, the relinquishment of superior functions to machines that cannot be up to the standards we would like to abide. So I think we should not indulge in the temptation to attribute superior function that might be encouraged by the very fact that we formalize the relationship as one between peers, basically. Then there is this interesting analysis for which we should treat machines, at least some kind of machines, the human-like machines as persons, as a way to avoid the errors of the past. We should abide to a notion, inclusive notion of personhood, in order not to run the risk of leaving outside of these categories entities that might deserve to be included. So if we make a mistake, it's better to make a mistake being on the safe side, adopting a more inclusive than a less inclusive notion. But in a very interesting article, Joanna Bryson, she has given this title, Robots Should Be Slaves, because of course what is the past error? The past errors are, for example, that of slavery, where human beings that were fully entitled to be treated as a legal person were in fact considered as property, as things. So Joanna Bryson, by saying that robots should be slaves, should be considered as servants, points to the fact that by trying in the effort of humanizing robots, we might reach the opposite effect, that of dehumanizing humans. What humans? Those that are entrusted to the care of artificial agents, to the care of machines. And she also stresses that the time and resources that we can devote to social interaction are so precious that should not be spent on interacting with machine, but on the contrary should be spent for authentic socialization. And here again, talking in legal terms, I think that using a legal structure such as that of a legal personhood for robots may misrepresent this relationship between an artificial agent and a human agent in a way that may justify somehow this spending more time in social engagement with machine instead than with humans. Another idea we can find in this article by Kate Darling. It was a paper presented at the conference, a We Robot conference, a conference that takes place every year, I believe, in the United States. And she, in the latest version, she changes a little bit the claim, and she said that we should extend legal protection to social robots, not because of their inherent features, but because that would be a way of protecting ourselves, of protecting our feelings. Since we project feelings, we ascribe intentions to robots, to social robots especially, we should be protected against abuse, against mistreatment of machine as a way of protecting ourselves, because we could be traumatized by such behavior, or to the contrary, we could become insensitive to that kind of treatment. Think of children exposed to such behavior that may not tell the difference between mistreating a machine and mistreating other children or animals in other contexts. And she makes an analogy with laws against animal abuse. She says, after all, we protect animals because if we treat badly animals, we become inhuman persons. Well, I think these arguments are not very convincing for protecting machines from abuse. There are already property rights which are sufficient, which gives for sufficient protection, at least when the mistreatment comes from third parties, not from the owner. But especially the analogy with animals is misplaced, because it is true that there is a most recent strand of legislation that protects animals, that is concerned with their well-being and protects them from suffering, from pain. But that legislation rests on the assumption that animals are sentient beings that feel pain, and that is the very purpose for which we protect them. I think at the end we come back to the very basic question: do we really need to create robots that mimic human feelings, that make us believe that this mutual relationship, this relationship of care is mutual, is reciprocal? Or we could perhaps design robots this way only when this is really necessary. This morning there was this concept, this point was made. Perhaps there are occasions in which we need to design deceptive robots. Perhaps, I think another example could be when that would be more effective in a therapeutic meaning. It's the case of the Paro seal that is used for the care of patients with Alzheimer's or with dementia. In that case, it is important to have this impression that the pet is reacting emotionally to the person, because that helps have a therapeutic effect. And then I come to another analysis that I have taken from a paper by a young philosopher, Fabio Fossa, who noticed how often the relationship between a human and a machine, a robot, is described, is articulated in terms of trust, and not just in terms of reliance or reliability on the fact that the machine will perform the tasks that have been designed for it. And trust as if there was something more at stake than pure reliance on the performance of the machine. And it follows from this way of articulating this relationship that a technical failure could amount not just to a disappointment in the user, but to a sort of betrayal. However, the same author points to the fact that betrayal implies autonomous decisions, therefore implies intentionally deviating from the goals that have been set for us, which is something that for a machine it's not possible to do. Therefore, technical default can never be described as a breach of a moral duty, and in legal terms, malfunctioning that even causes harm to other people cannot be considered a wrongdoing on the part of the robots. However, if this is true, the problem of deciding who is liable for the damages brought about by a robot remains intact, and we have to deal with it. And so we come to the functional perspective, to the idea that we could attribute to robots legal personhood in order to make them responsible for accidents that may happen. And why so? Why there is first of all, there is a problem we have to deal with in liability. Because current liability rules seem to be challenged by the qualities, by the functioning of autonomous robots, because autonomous robots are very complex machines that behave autonomously, that can be equipped with machine learning techniques and therefore exhibit emergent behavior, not very easy to understand what went wrong when something goes wrong, and especially difficult would be for the victims of the damage caused by a robot to understand and to attain the burden of proof that rests on them when they want to recover the damages they have suffered. Therefore, in order to deal with these problems, different strategies have been proposed. I have listed here some of them, and I cannot now talk about them because I don't have time, but the very last solution, which is included in the resolution of the European Parliament, is precisely that of creating any person, an electronic person, that would represent a one-stop shop for the victims to address, to sue, in case they suffer damages following the interaction with a robot. Of course, in this case, if we accepted this solution, we should also give an identification number or other form of identification to the robot and keep it with an asset. And we should also have to decide the ways to fund these assets. In this case, in this solution, robots could also be electronic persons that can enter in very basic contractual transactions with third parties. And this is an hypothesis we discussed within a project, Robotera, for companion robots, precisely because robots could also carry out very basic activities such as carrying shopping bags for their users, and so why not even buy them and buy, for instance, drugs or food for their users. But the very basic idea behind this proposal is that, as I said, of identifying a unique point to which the victim of damage could refer in order to recover the damages, and also a collateral effect of this solution would be that of shielding all the other actors along the value chain from liability. So the producers, the programmers, the seller, and so on would not be considered at least immediately liable towards the victims. This proposal was received very badly and criticized a lot. More than 100 experts, more than 150 experts in AI, robotics, medicine, law, and so on, wrote an open letter to the European Commission in order to contest this solution, and this letter was also backed by two philosophers based in Oxford with a letter to Nature. What are the main reasons why they criticize this solution? Well, first of all, they say it is technically unsound in that it overestimates the actual capabilities of a robot. It is not so difficult, they say, to understand what went wrong. It would be always possible, or almost always possible, to reconstruct the causality and identify what went wrong, and so who is to blame for that. But coming to the sort of more legal objections, the most important point is that this solution, by shielding all the people, the humans that are behind the machine from liability, from accountability, would create an undesirable effect. In what sense? Would conceal, would mask the real liability. And this is an objection that has to be taken very seriously if we know that liability rules have two very important goals. One is that of compensating the victim, and at that goal, the legal personhood for robots would probably work very well. But the other important goal that has to be balanced with the first one is that of preventing accident from happening. And it is true that such a solution would probably not work very well at deterring behaviors such as negligent behavior, or not using all the safety measures that can be envisioned in order to make machines more safe, could probably not be reached, or at that goal, this solution could not be very effective. Now, in 3 words, and I conclude, I quite agree with this criticism, because I think that this proposal is first of all, redundant, because we could reach the same aim of facilitating the victims who want to recover their damages by other solutions, such as compulsory insurance scheme, that are less disruptive of the legal system. Second, because it is slippery in the sense that once we have attributed legal personhood to robots, from this solution, other consequences could be derived, and we may face difficulties in limiting to the problem of liability the effect, the impact of choosing such an important legal category to describe robots. And third, I think it is equivocal in the sense that the criticism that arose after the proposal basically shows it, demonstrates it. It is very difficult to maintain that this solution has only a functional purpose, a functional goal, and not an ideological one. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Erika. I would like to hear something from there, from your side.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation.
Did I see? Okay. Okay, we have three behind you, but after all, you were almost the first, so you can start.
No, please.
Yeah, it's a matter, you know.
Yeah, I'm from Bangor University. I was really interested in your point about overly empathetic care robots. So I'm interested in where you would place the border. Where should the line be in terms of things that robots should not be able to do? So in a care setting, for example, you might have robots giving sports massages, perhaps administering some form of therapy. So it might be interesting to read and react and monitor pain levels, for example. So do you think that is by default problematic? And if that's not a case example that you might have in mind, where for you do you think the border should be? What does overly empathetic look like for you, I guess is my question.
Okay. Let's wait for, we gather more than one, okay, so otherwise the time runs out.
This is Alistair Isaac from the University of Edinburgh. I wanted to ask about this functional solution, which I think I do agree with your criticisms about in terms of the state of robotics today. But this, to me, I find it quite interesting that there are experts on AI making this point. But to me, this strikes me as a place where there should be room for people working on the legal side of things to really engage with what's going on technologically. And the reason is that if you have robots or artificial agents that are customizable or personalizable in various ways, or learn in different contexts after they've been built and when they've been passed on to the user, then I think there is some leeway for some of their actions falling under the scope of they were in the control of the person who built them, but some of those actions being related to these contextual effects or maybe customized things or personalizable things that were done to them after they were constructed, that maybe there really is a serious argument that it's sort of wrong to put the manufacturer at obligation for that. So something worth thinking about.
We have Professor Di Martino.
So there's a couple of very silly questions from outside. I'm not an expert, I have no idea. But the first question would be about the scope of the presentation. Why are we limiting the scope of this topic, legal personhood, to only social and care robots? Maybe it's the topic of today evening, I don't know. But I don't think that if you talk about legal personhood, you should confine the problem of legal personhood to this kind of robots. And the second question is regarding the slide on betrayal and trust, the specific problem of betrayal. I'm wondering whether there is a problem of betrayal not in the case of a technical default, not in a case of a failure, But the problem of betrayal I think, is a broader one. So betrayal is how do we consider the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence agents in case where betrayal is inside the normal relationship without any problem of failure on the part of artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you. Please, Erika.
Okay, so on the question about overly empathetic robots, I think we could decide on a case-by-case basis. I don't have a very clear idea on where we should draw a line. I think there can be very strong reasons that justify empathetic robots. I mentioned one of them, which is therapy. So if there is a health reason, why not? I believe in that case robots should be designed in such a way, even if we can call a deceptive, at least in a weak meaning, a deceptive way. But there can be other reasons to do so. Perhaps yes, but we cannot, I think, decide in abstract terms. But looking at the context and the specific function the robot is called to perform. Generally speaking, if we care about the relationship that can come in place between a user and the machine, when machines are used in order to interact with the elderly, with children. Andrea made this case this morning. Perhaps we should be very careful in creating robots that intentionally make the user believe that the machine itself cares for him or for her. Then the second question, you made me forget. The second question was about
robots that are personalizable.
Yes. Well, in fact, there is an interesting proposal for, especially for that case, for robots that works on open platforms that can be manipulated after they have been bought to immunize, to create an immunity for producers, because it is true that in that case the producer or the programmer can have no idea of how the robot will be used. Well, in that case, there can be a case for that. But it is also true that the regime of liability for defective products that makes, of course, the producer liable for the malfunctioning of the products will apply only in case of defects that are present in the product when it is sold. So perhaps in this case there wouldn't even be the conditions for applying these liability regimes. And in that case, yes, why not? But you see why I say the solution is redundant, because compulsory insurance could work in this case without the need to resort to such a meaningful legal category that in any event can be really misunderstood. And with regard to the questions by Professor Di Martino, well, my presentation was focused on social and care robots, because the second part, that is legal personhood in a functionalist perspective, could be applied also to any kind of robot, to any kind of autonomous robots, for instance, self-driving vehicles. This could apply perfectly. But the other rationales that have been put forward in order to justify legal personhood for robots only apply to social robots, to robots that engage socially, that react in human-like ways. In that cases, it is only for those types of robots that that legal personhood is considered a solution that should be adopted, because it rests on some, not necessarily on their inherent features, but on the fact that they engage socially with the person. So it is the relationship that matters. It is the perception in the users that matter. And that's why I focus on this perspective. The second question, betray, yeah.
Normal interaction, whenever normal interaction leads to
betray,
a kind of violation of trust or betrayal.
But I don't know, I can only...
This is also a question from us.
Betray.
Where a normal relationship or partner can bring you to the human being that
I don't know if we can imagine, I cannot think of a situation that I would call betrayal unless choosing other goals different from that have been set for the machine would be possible. And that is not technically possible. I cannot think of something different from technical failure that could apply at least to the robots, state-of-the-art robots. I don't understand what you mean by betrayal, unless doing something. Yeah, perhaps he knows.
Control this, let's say, empathetic dimension of the relationship, for example. How but the robot is learning from and during the interaction, I can really imagine that in a normal situation, a violation of trust or betrayal, or simply because the human can build up an image of the robot, and the robot doesn't say no, don't have this empathetic relation to me because I am a robot. But
In that sense.
Because the way that the artificial intelligence agents react to the relationship may be as such, by itself, kind of betrayal.
I think, may I?
No,
may
please.
I think you have, how to say, brought the discussion to a level that today is difficult to be considered based on the achievements of present AI and technology today, you know. I don't know, because this is something that we don't have so far true, real, autonomous behavior especially at the cognitive level, with the full cognitive level of control of behavior by present robots. So far, we haven't achieved such an autonomy. And so, if you, yes?
Sorry for just breaking 1 second, just to understand fully the proposal. Sorry for people who are
Sure.
here. If this is true, now I have a conceptual problem, because if you say, well, we are not at the level from the technical point of view, then I don't really understand why this should be a problem, or how is the situation where you can speak of technical fault leading to betrayal. I don't see the conceptual correctness or coherence in that, because if we take for granted that you have no technically, from a technical point of view, no level in that interaction, then I don't really conceive a situation where you have a technical fault leading to true betrayal, which implies autonomous.
Sure.
So the problem is moved, the discussion is moved from a conceptual point of view, or I am totally outside the context.
Perhaps I have stretched a little bit the argument in order, for the sake of the argument, but it is true that it is conceived in these terms, this relationship. If you, in the literature, you can find very often the concept of trust as an item, as a criterion according to which you have to evaluate the relationship and the reliability of the robots. It is never used, this more pragmatic term of reliance or reliability, and it is conceived in terms of trust, and therefore the opposite of trust is betrayal. Perhaps you find more often trust than betrayal, but as I said, for the sake of the argument.